It is New Year's Eve in Chicago. The wind off Lake Michigan cuts like a knife. I am standing on the stoop of our historic Gold Coast brownstone, recovering my balance after my father Richard physically shoved me out the door. My suitcase hits the snowbank next to me. "Get out before I call the cops," he screams. Inside, my brother Jordan is slow clapping, holding the vintage champagne I bought. I do not cry. I adjust my coat, smile coldly, and whisper gladly. 2 hours later, the street is flooded with police lights. They aren't here for me. They are here for the tenants. Stop scrolling. If your family threw you out into the snow on New Year's Eve, would you walk away forever? Or would you play the ace card you have been hiding for 3 years? Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from, because I want to see how far this story travels. I am sitting in my car, parked 3 houses down from the brownstone. The engine is running, the heater battling the Chicago freeze, but my hands are cold. I am not looking at the house as a daughter who has just been evicted. I am looking at it as a forensic accountant looking at a crime scene. I open my laptop. The screen glows blue in the dark cab, illuminating the spreadsheet that has been my secret companion for 8 years. I call it the ledger of silence. Most people think financial abuse is loud. They think it looks like stolen credit cards or emptied savings accounts. But in my family, abuse was a transaction. It was a subscription fee I paid for the privilege of being tolerated. I scroll through the columns. Row 4, January 2017. $6,000 sent to my father Richard for property taxes he claimed were suffocating him. Row 12, August 2018. $40,000 wire transferred for my mother's emergency medical procedure. She told me it was a heart issue. 2 weeks later, she came home with a new chin and tighter eyelids. I never asked for the money back. I just logged it. Then there are the Jordan expenses. My brother, the artist, the entrepreneur, the visionary who could never quite see past his own reflection. Row 24. $15,000 for his failed coffee shop. Row 36. $22,000 for his legal fees after a bar fight he swore wasn't his fault. It goes on and on. 8 years of transfers. 96 months of direct deposits. Total value, $576,000. $500,000 invested in people who just threw my suitcase into a snowbank. You might wonder why a woman who hunts financial fraud for a living would let herself be defrauded by her own blood. It is a fair question. The answer isn't stupidity. It is conditioning. This is the trap of normalized cruelty. When you grow up in a house where affection is scarce, you learn to pay for it. You learn that your value is not intrinsic. It is utility. I did not pay them because I thought they loved me. I paid them because I thought the payments were the rent I owed for taking up space in their world. They trained me to believe that their cruelty was just the cost of doing business, and like a good auditor, I just kept balancing the books, hoping that if I paid enough, one day the account would settle. But tonight, looking at the warm yellow light spilling from the windows where they are drinking my champagne, I realize the account will never settle. There is no number high enough to buy their respect. They do not see me as a savior. They see me as a resource. And resources do not have feelings. They do not have boundaries. They just get used until they are empty. I look at the total at the bottom of the spreadsheet one last time. $576,000. It is not a gift. It is a loan they never intended to repay. But in my line of work, we have a saying, the numbers never lie, but liars always mess up the numbers. I close the laptop. The sadness is gone, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of an audit. It is time to collect. To understand why I am sitting in the cold watching my breath fog up the windshield, you have to understand what happened exactly 60 minutes ago inside that dining room. It wasn't a family dinner. It was a shakedown disguised as a celebration. The room was stiflingly hot. My mother, Lisa, likes to keep the thermostat at 75 degrees because the draft from the lake chills her bones, or so she claims. The air smelled of expensive roast beef and the heavy floral perfume she wears to mask the scent of gin. I was sitting there, cutting into a piece of meat that cost more than my first car payment, when my brother Jordan cleared his throat. He has this way of smiling that usually works on investors and Instagram followers. A mix of boyish charm and practiced confidence. But tonight he looked sweaty. I have a small situation, he said, refilling his glass with the Dom Perignon I had brought. I need a bridge loan. Just until the quarter closes. I stopped eating. In my family, a bridge loan means a donation. How much? I asked. $1.2 million, he said. He didn't even blink. The silence that followed was heavy. My father, Richard, didn't look surprised. He just kept chewing, staring at me with an expectancy that made my skin crawl. They had discussed this. This was the ambush. It is for legal fees, Jordan continued quickly. A misunderstanding with the franchise partners. They are freezing my assets. I just need you to liquidate your 401k and maybe take a small equity line. I will pay you back double in 6 months. He slid a manila envelope across the mahogany table. Most sisters would look at their brother's pleading eyes. I am a forensic accountant. I looked at the papers. I opened the folder and started reading. It took me less than 3 minutes to see the pattern. There were no franchise partners. There were no restaurants. There were just transfers between shell companies, payouts to early investors using money from new investors, and a massive deficit that was growing by the day. This isn't a legal misunderstanding, Jordan, I said, closing the folder. This is a Ponzi scheme. You are defrauding your friends. That is when the explosion happened. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal jump. Richard stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He didn't ask Jordan if it was true. He didn't ask if his son was a criminal. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. You're always so jealous, he spat. Your brother is a visionary. He takes risks. You just sit in your little office counting other people's money because you are too scared to build anything of your own. You're going to help him, Gabrielle. You are going to sign those papers tonight or you are no daughter of mine. I looked at them. My mother was studying her fingernails, pretending she wasn't hearing her husband demand I bankrupt myself to save her golden boy from prison. Jordan was smirking, knowing Daddy was fighting his battle. I realized then that they didn't care where the money came from. They didn't care about the fraud. They only cared that the tap was running dry. I am not giving you a dime, I said quietly. Richard pointed to the door. Then get out. Get out of my house and don't come back until you learn some loyalty. And that is how I ended up here watching the snow bury my suitcase. They think they have one because they still have the house. They think the walls around them belong to Richard's legacy. They have no idea that the very roof over their heads is just another line item in my ledger, and I am about to close the account. My phone vibrates against the center console like a trapped insect. I have been sitting here for 12 minutes, waiting for the police liaison. I called on the non-emergency line. In the silence of the car, the notifications sound like gunshots. My family thinks they have one. They think the silence from my end is the silence of a defeated daughter realizing she has lost her place in the kingdom. They have no idea it is the silence of a prosecutor preparing an opening statement. I pick up the phone. The screen is a cascade of delusion. First, there is a text from my mother, Lisa. It is not an apology. It is a masterclass in passive-aggressive manipulation. She writes, "You have ruined New Year's Eve. Your father is beside himself. Fix this before midnight or do not bother coming back. We are a family, Gabrielle, and families forgive, but they do not forget disrespect." I almost laugh. She talks about forgiveness like she is dispensing grace when she should be asking for amnesty. Then I open Instagram. My brother Jordan has been busy. He has posted a story. It is a boomerang of him popping the cork on the vintage Dom Perignon I bought 3 hours ago. The caption reads, "Cleaning out the toxic energy for 2025. Hashtag new beginnings. Hashtag entrepreneur life." In the background, I can see my father laughing, his face flushed with the triumph of a man who thinks he has successfully bullied his banker into submission. They are celebrating my exile in the very house they believe protects them. But the real escalation comes from Richard. There is a voicemail. I press play and his voice fills the car, thick with scotch and entitlement. "Gabrielle," he says, "if you do not transfer those funds by tomorrow morning, I am calling your firm. I will tell the partners you are emotionally unstable. I will tell them you steal from family. Do not test me, girl. I made you and I can break you." I listened to it twice. A younger version of me would have been terrified. She would have heard the authority in his voice and crumbled. But the woman sitting in this car sees something else. I see the psychology behind the threat. It is what we call the illusion of power of the empty wallet. Richard screams and threatens because deep down he knows he is hollow. In our society, men like my father equate their worth with their ability to provide, to control, to own. But Richard lost that ability 3 years ago when he quietly went bankrupt. He lost his financial authority, so he had to double down on his patriarchal authority. He clings to the title of head of household with violent desperation because it is the only currency he has left. His aggression isn't strength. It is the panic of a king who knows his crown is made of paper. He needs me to be weak so he can feel strong. He needs me to be the child so he can pretend he is still the provider. I look up at the house one last time. They are dancing on a trapdoor. They believe the deed to that brownstone is their birthright, their shield against the world. They do not know that the shield belongs to Phoenix Holdings and Phoenix Holdings is sitting in a Honda Civic 3 doors down watching the clock. Then in the rearview mirror I see them. Blue lights turning the snowy street into a kaleidoscope of cold color. 2 patrol cars pull up silently behind me. It is time. I close my laptop, pick up the heavy black binder from the passenger seat and step out into the wind. The victory lap is over. I approach the 2 police officers standing by their cruisers. The older one, Sergeant Miller, looks at me with that weary expression law enforcement reserves for holiday domestic calls. He sees a woman standing in the snow on New Year's Eve and he expects tears. He expects a story about a fight over politics or a drunk uncle. He is prepared to tell me that this is a civil matter and they can't get involved. I do not give him the chance. I shift instantly into auditor mode. My posture straightens. My voice drops an octave, losing all traces of the daughter and becoming entirely the CEO. Officer, I say, extending my hand. I am Gabrielle. I place the call. Thank you for coming. Ma'am, he nods. We got a report of a disturbance? Look, if this is just a family dispute, we usually suggest everyone cool off for the night. This is not a family dispute, I say, cutting him off with surgical precision. This is a property dispute involving squatters who have violated the terms of their lease. I am requesting an escort to execute an immediate eviction for trespassing. I hand him the black binder. I call it the nuclear folder. It does not contain photos or memories. It contains the only thing that matters in the Gold Coast, a paper trail. He opens it, shining his flashlight on the first page. It is a deed of sale dated 3 years ago. You own this property? He asks, eyebrows raising. Through a shell company, I explain. Phoenix Holdings. I am the sole member. This is the secret I have kept locked in my chest for 36 months. 3 years ago, my father, the great real estate speculator, quietly went bankrupt. He leveraged the brownstone to cover bad bets in commercial zoning that never got approved. The bank foreclosed. It was going to be a public auction. The shame would have killed him. So I stepped in. I used my savings, money I earned finding hidden assets for divorce lawyers, and I bought the debt. I bought the house from the bank before the sign ever went up in the yard. I set up Phoenix Holdings so my father would never know his savior was the daughter he despised. I told them a private investor bought it and agreed to let them stay on as caretakers to maintain the historic value. Look at page 4, officer, I say, pointing to a highlighted paragraph. He flips the page. Lease agreement. Tenant, Richard and Lisa. Rent, $1 per year. And the good conduct clause, I add. Clause 7b. Tenants agree that any act of verbal abuse, physical aggression, or harassment toward the landlord or the landlord's agents constitutes an immediate breach of contract and forfeiture of tenancy rights. Tonight, when Richard shoved me into the snow, he didn't just assault his daughter. He assaulted the agent of Phoenix Holdings. He violated Clause 7b. They think they own the place, the officer mutters, looking up at the house where the music is still thumping. They think a lot of things, I say coldly. They think they are royalty. But legally they are month-to-month tenants on an expired lease. And I am closing the building. The officer closes the binder. The weariness is gone from his face, replaced by professional alertness. He looks at the house, then back at me. Hey, Miss Gabrielle. Let's go have a talk with your tenants. I walk toward the house with 2 officers beside me. I'm not shaking anymore. I feel the same cold clarity I get before serving a subpoena to a CEO who thinks he hid the fraud perfectly. The audit is done. Judgment is next. As our boots crunch on the frozen driveway, my mind isn't on the eviction. It's on the secret I never told the police. The double-dip theft. People assume I bought this house to spite my father. They're wrong. I bought it because 3 years ago in the digital trash bin of his computer I found the truth. Massive wire transfers draining my parents' retirement. $400,000 funneled into a Cayman shell named J Prime Ventures. The golden child hadn't lost his own money. He'd emptied our parents' entire pension to bankroll leased supercars and nightlife. They think they're secure in a high-yield fund. In reality, they're broke and their favorite son robbed them blind. I could have sent him to prison, but it would have destroyed my mother. So I used every dollar I'd earned tracing hidden assets for Fortune 500 firms and bought the house to keep them off the street. I laundered their survival. And tonight, Jordan tried to steal again. This time by mortgaging my property to cover his collapsing Ponzi scheme. They celebrate him while preparing to exile me. Victims worshipping their executioner. On the porch, Sergeant Miller knocks. My father opens the door, smug, scotch in hand, expecting the police to enforce his rule. Instead, Miller steps aside. I show the deed. Phoenix Holdings. Owner, Gabrielle Royals. The scotch shatters at his feet. Jordan screams theft. I remind him I bought the house with the money I recovered from the accounts he drained. The officers give them 30 minutes to leave. My mother wails. For once I feel nothing. Only release. This isn't an amputation. It's a surgery. I'm removing a tumor that lived rent-free in my life for decades. Later, after they're gone, I walk through the quiet house. I pour out their abandoned champagne, sit in my father's leather chair, and send an email awarding my mentee Elena a full scholarship. The exact money I used to send my parents every month. Outside, fireworks bloom over Lake Michigan. It took $576,000 to learn this. You cannot buy respect from people who live off your shame. The ledger of silence is closed.